Hello, everyone. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Cameron Kempson, who is the co-founder and director of education for an organization called Shift. Welcome to the show, Cameron.
Thank you for having me, Stephen. It's good to be here.
I am grateful that you made the time. So tell me a little bit about Shift.
Sure. So Shift is an education and an accreditation platform focused on technology first, best practices. And really, it came about because there was so much excitement around the technology first movement. And we wanted to be assured that people who were including technology in their homes were educated on how to implement it, integrate it, and understand what's out there. So we developed an education opportunity for people to come online where it's accessible and affordable, get the education they need, and then support people with IDD looking to include technology in their homes.
Amazing. So before we get into it, tell me a little bit more about what you mean by technology first.
Sure. Yeah. So, in the disabilities world, we've been integrating technology little bits at a time. And overall, states and providers started saying, this really should become a natural support for people, just like technology is a natural support for us. And so the movement embraces the idea that technology will be considered as a part of service or support planning first before we consider wrapping people around the individuals. We think about how do we use technology as a natural way to create opportunities for independence throughout the day.
So it would come before when you say wrapping people. So if an agency or a family is considering how best to provide a healthy living environment for their child or their adult living at home with intellectual and developmental disabilities, one of the components that should come, or the component that should be before any other consideration, should be how we're going to use the technology that's available. Am I getting that right?
You are. That's exactly right. Thinking about instead of having somebody sit on my couch, let's say 24/7, just in case I fall or just in case I want to go somewhere, why can't we have technology be that opportunity to be available 24/7? And then if support is needed by somebody in the community, in the family, somebody who's a staff person, then the technology can alert those people to come assist. So what we're creating is this opportunity for the dignity of risk or the capacity to make choices for yourself and then learn from those choices.
I love that. Tell me more about dignity of risk.
Sure, sure. So, dignity of risk is the idea that all of us as human beings, whether we are disabled or not, have this capacity to make choices for our lives. And when we do, sometimes we make mistakes and sometimes we succeed. But typically, when you have an able bodied person or neurotypical person make a mistake, like if I leave the stove on, let's say, and go out in my front yard, nobody comes to my house and takes the stove out and says, you don't know how to cook, you don't know how to be safe with a stove, right? But people with disabilities, sometimes we have this tendency to bubble wrap them and want to protect them. And out of the goodness of our hearts, we want them to be safe, our loved ones. But what that does then is that almost creates secondary conditions that continue to confine them. So technology has this great capacity to be discreet and to really serve people with disabilities just like it serves us, smart home capability. Somebody can be alerted that their stove is on and reminded, go turn your stove off or go check what you're cooking, rather than me having to get a call from my mom saying, are you being safe with your stove, or have my staff show up at the door and say, you're not cooking safely, we're taking your stove away. So I know those are pretty extreme examples, but it's an effort to help your population, the people that are here today, understand We all should have that opportunity to make choices for our lives. And we all should have the opportunity to advocate for what our preferences are for our lives. That's
So,
self-determination. Yeah,
right. And I know self-determination is an absolute buzzword in the IDD community. But I want to go back a little bit to this idea of technology first.
sure.
When you and other advocates in this movement, say, are approaching traditional agencies, nonprofits, and government workers and agencies that provide supported housing, supported living services, independent living services, and other types of in-home support. Do
Mhm.
you ever get, I mean, there must be some people who are kind of scared or challenged or concerned about taking the human person out of the equation.
Sure.
How do you respond to that?
Sure. That's a great question. So, as an educator, in the field for 30 years, I have learned to create an opportunity for education in those kind of conversations, right? So typically the way that I start that conversation is, it's not an either or, it's a both and. We can have, in my life, I have both technology and my husband and my children and my other family members, my neighbors. It can be the same way for people with disabilities or in the IDD community. So when I talk to providers or state entities who are looking to consider this but are concerned, my go to conversation is around then how do we help support staff, provider organizations, leadership people understand and approach the technology in a way that is safe and secure. We don't put technology in place without educating ourselves. We need to do the same thing when we're using it in this tech first movement. I like to say that in the tech first movement, it's not necessarily technology that comes first, it's the person first. But then also education has to come first. We can't just start throwing technology at an issue without thinking about the person and educating people on that technology.
So that brings us back to Shift and your
Yeah,
organization. And so
sure.
when is that what inspired you to co-found Shift? And how do you see Shift's role in this movement to consider technology primary in the way we think about support for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities?
Yeah, I used to be in the technology world after I was in the education world, and it just came naturally for me that when I was working with providers about technology, to sit down and have these education sessions with them to prepare them for the tech. And as time went on, I realized there's not really an organized set of education and conversation around how we do these things. There's a lot of casual conversation or one on one support. But if we're going to start using a term like technology first movement, then where is the education and the opportunity behind that that gives it some credibility and validity? So I started working on a curriculum with the company I used to work with, and then moved into working with states to pilot that curriculum. And
Wow.
so many supporters along the way that just immediately got, wow, this is the piece we've been missing.
So this is training for whom?
So currently it's training for direct support staff, mid-level management, leadership. We have all levels of learning programs, state agencies, people who are providing service coordination or case management. And then eventually we'll move into the realm of family and self-advocate education as well.
Can you share with my listeners just a really, cherry-picked idea of what the curriculum looks like? And I know that's really broad, but
Right.
just a few key things that you want to teach or that you want these workers to get out of the program.
Right. I think the first one is to help staff, especially staff that's doing direct support, understand that their jobs are not going to disappear because of technology.
There's a lot of fear about that. Yeah.
Right, right. I mean, I as a parent, I would not want my child's support to disappear and assume that technology could completely offer her what she needs. Um, so yes, so the first piece for me is making sure that providers, but especially those direct support staff, appreciate you're not losing your job. What we're doing is we're reallocating your responsibilities. So we're creating opportunities for you to do some new and different things with the people you support, because you're not having to just be available for just in case times like nighttime, right? So you have more opportunity to really get your hands on support experiences with the people you're out there with. So that's one piece. Another piece is helping people understand the types of technologies that really do enable independence. And the phrase that's come about in the tech world or in the IDD world has been enabling technology. So that's a kind of a niche of technologies under assistive technologies that are really geared toward how do we create opportunities for independence at home, at work, and in the community. And that all actually was grounded in the residents at first, in home settings, because that's where we started seeing smart home technology. But now it's starting to broaden out into that community and work setting. And then I think the final thing is going back to that idea of dignity of risk and self-determination. So really helping people appreciate that this isn't a quick fix solution, but it's really a natural part. That's how I like to reference it. Technology is a natural part of anyone's day. And how do we help people understand that it can be a natural part of the day of somebody who lives in the IDD community?
So the training seems to me to be as much about mindset as it is about. So the first thing I thought of when I learned of your work is, okay, you're going to teach people how to use gadget X to, deliver medication or something. And I don't know if
Right.
that's a component of it, but what you're talking about is a modality, a kind of a mindset shift for direct support workers. Am I getting that
Exactly.
right?
You are. In fact, the
Okay.
way that the name shift came about is we kept using the phrase people need to make a culture shift when they think about becoming technology first. And shift just made sense, because that's what we're asking people to do, is not just try something new, but truly transform how they're doing it. And that impacts the culture of an organization. So technology comes and goes. One day this medication dispenser can be the be all end all, and 6 months later, we have a new technology dispenser. So spending time teaching on specific technologies themselves is not going to be the way to really create the transformation. What creates the transformation is just like what you said. We look at all of the factors impacting how we implement technology, all the best practices that need to be adopted. And then no matter what technology comes along, we can apply that knowledge and experience to integrating those new pieces.
So you mentioned best practices. Does
Yeah.
your organization have a list or a protocol for best practices that is, you know, uh, available to direct support workers, who are who are taking advantage of your educational service?
Yes. So the courses really are geared, whether you're direct support or supervisory or leadership, the courses are all geared toward working through those best practices. So things like communication, identification, assessment, planning. The approach to the education is really trying to make it an interactive and applicable opportunity for learning. So not only are they reading and learning about information on a screen, but they're engaging in activities, they're watching video stories, and they're hearing ways that people are already doing this so that they can associate, you know what, I know somebody like that. We can be doing that here in our organization. So yes, the best practices, I like to say it's not like a one and done. It's really about learning over the course of time, not only what they are, but then how to integrate them.
I also understand that there's an accreditation element of this. Can you share with me and my listeners more about that?
Sure, sure. So as organizations and states began calling themselves technology first, I had other organizations and families saying, what does that really mean? If someone says they're tech first, what does that mean? And what does that mean in particular for my loved one or for the people that we're supporting? And so, because we had developed this extensive education system around tech first and around best practices, we started working with providers in pilot projects, and actually one state, the state of Tennessee, in a pilot project around accreditation, and thinking of how do we accredit organizations with standards and saying you're meeting the best practice standard for technology first. And once we worked through some of that piloting, we realized that there's a way to create a framework for organizations to say, I'm meeting all of these standards and we are doing this consistently. And we've made that culture shift, or we've transformed our organization. And so why not acknowledge that? Why not have the opportunity for people to demonstrate to other organizations and families, we've met this level and we're proud of that, and they should be acknowledged for that.
So, is this the kind of thing where a direct support service provider, agency, government group could publish a little logo on some page somewhere or in some marketing material to say, we have this accreditation?
That yes, we have a whole little marketing kit that receive. They get a certificate from us to be able to, hang up in their organization or post online. And we honor them through our social media, as well as we actually have attended a state organized opportunity where they highlighted all of the organizations that had been accredited tech first.
Wow.
So yes,
Are
yes.
there are you the only one at this time that you're aware of doing this in the country, like doing an accreditation program, or are there other agencies and government entities and companies that also offer an accreditation that kind of competes with yours?
Sure. So there are organizations, pioneering organizations. I want to
Yeah.
give props to so many organizations out there that have been providing this type of assistive technology education and working to help support both leadership and direct support professionals. But as far as I know at this time, Shift is the only organization awarding a technology first accreditation to organizations.
How many how many states and how many organizations have agencies? Let me ask in two ways. Number one, how many states have agencies that have received your accreditation? And number two, overall in the country, how many agencies have this accreditation?
Right. So currently, no state agencies, but in terms of providers, we've got 18 providers currently. Actually, no, I'm sorry. We just added four more. So 22 providers
Have this
with,
accreditation.
with the accreditation.
And
Those
in
tech,
what states are they in?
so they're in DC, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, and that's it.
Yeah.
Currently.
But
Yeah.
your goal is, I imagine, to be more national, even more national in scope. Is that fair?
Definitely. Yes, that is fair. And
Yeah.
actually, if you look at the states that have been involved in education with Shift and in our programs, we've had a reach of 23 states in
That's pretty
just in
good.
2 years' time.
Just in 2 years. Wow.
Yes, Shift actually came about in June of 2020.
Wow.
And
Right
then
in the heart of the heart of COVID. My goodness.
I know. And then became its own company in April of 2021. So
Wow.
in a short 2 year time period, we feel we're just humbled by the overwhelming support from states and providers and their excitement about the fact that this opportunity is out there. So
That's really interesting. Is it very expensive? I mean, I would imagine that some of these agencies are very cash strapped, just trying to provide direct support. So for them to go and get an accreditation or to take the training is, as much as it appears intellectually like this is absolutely something you want to do. Do you get pushback from the financial aspect, and how do you manage that? Because you're a for-profit, your organization is a for-profit company, correct?
we are, but we actually, one reason that we designed Shift the way we did, meaning through online education, we wanted it to be affordable. And in particular, we wanted it to be affordable for providers to invest in their direct support staff. We did not want people to just have the leadership team come take education and then say, everybody else will get it via osmosis.
Right, right.
We wanted to create an opportunity not only for affordability, but for accessibility. And if you're working, these shifts with people doing direct support, you don't always have the accessibility to go to a class in the middle of the day. And so the online learning became a unique format, initially, but now it's just after COVID, it's, exploded in terms of people's willingness and involvement in online learning opportunities. So it was very important that we create an accessible and affordable way for people to get education. And the great thing that we've done with Shift is it's not a one and done. You don't just come take your classes and you're finished. We know that because technology evolves so quickly, basically what you're doing is you get a 2-year membership to Shift and you complete your credential or your certification during that time. But you also have access to live webinars, national conferences that we host, online resource library that we have with all kinds of channels around different topics. So it's really a learning community, not just a framework for getting education and then moving on.
I understand. You and I have been talking in terms of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Yeah.
Does your educational platform and your accreditation have a broader potential for people with all kinds of circumstances, both physical and cognitive, that are limiting, such that it might be of value to, for example, seniors who get in-home support and other communities?
Definitely. So, actually, in the current programs that we have, we include populations with mental health issues, populations with autism. It's a pretty broad spectrum, so that people can see that this can apply to more than just someone with IDD. Our goal in the future is to take that and adapt it to meet the needs of the aging community that we've had requests about, for education. But, the thing that Shift prides itself on is that we're not just taking the same curriculum, duplicating it, and changing up a couple of words, that we really work with other organizations, we partner with other people to ensure that the education is applicable to the people supporting that population. And then we pilot that education with a variety of state or provider organizations so that we can make sure that it's a meaningful experience before we put it out there as an education program.
Do you find that as you travel across the country and meet people in different communities, that there is cultural differences between the way we deliver services around the country that impact the way you provide your education and accreditation?
Stephen, that's an interesting question. I've worked across the U.S. both as an educator and in the tech field, and yes, for sure. But I also think that there are some commonalities based on Medicaid waiver standards and what best practices look like for people with IDD, in particular, using technology. And so I guess what we strive to do at Shift is take those commonalities and create those standards across the board that, regardless of what the characteristics might be of your state, that there are still points of reference that, regardless of where you are or what your waiver says for your state, that it's still meaningful learning and that it's still applicable to what you're doing in your job.
I wish we had a lot more time because there's a lot more questions I want to ask you, but
I know.
there's two I want to get to for sure before we conclude. The first is,
Please.
how do we as a disability community, broadly, I don't like that word, but as a community and
Sure.
as educators, because I like to consider myself an educator too in my own way, how do
Sure.
we bring our service to minority communities and typically traditionally disadvantaged communities, and communities that are for whom English is not a first language. Where I live is an incredibly urban area, and there's lots of different languages spoken, and there's been a tendency for services to be easier to access if you are, quite frankly, white and speaking English.
Definitely.
And have you given any thought to that and how to overcome that with your work?
We have, and I will say that the first form of accessibility that we've really focused on is accessibility for people with disabilities to be able to access our education. So everything is, we actually had people who were deaf and hearing impaired who went through our curriculum for us and helped us know where we needed to tweak that. But in terms of reaching out to marginalized populations, getting education into the hands of people who are doing that direct work in a variety of communities with a variety of languages. It seems to me that there are so many opportunities these days via technology that we could access supports as Shift to broaden the capacity of our services and the reach that we have at this time, because we're still smaller
Mhm.
than, um, but I will say that the conversations have already started happening with a couple of states around, especially language, the language barrier, and how do we create some language accessible. The other thing too that I don't want to overlook, that I feel like is really important as an educator, is ensuring that as you present content, that it is inclusive of cultural variation, race, ethnicity, ability, all those variations, not just in the form of photographs, but in the form of stories,
Yeah.
stories and adapted content that says, yeah, this works here, but you need to have these considerations here. And the broader the reach that Shift has had, the more that's brought that need into focus for us.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
bet. So, apart from things we've already discussed, what is the biggest thing that keeps you up at night? The biggest challenge in your role and your
Mhm.
work right now that you are hoping to overcome?
Mhm. Mhm. I think it's my passion. I've been in the disabilities world. I started when I was 20. Um, and my passion for the disabilities community has really led me down some interesting paths. And what I continue to advocate for is the capacity for the dignity of risk and self determination, but more so the dignity of risk, because a lot of learning and personal growth can be done when you have that capacity to make a choice and learn from the outcome, whether it's a mistake or a success. Um, and I think the only way we're going to get there is through, well, maybe not the only way, but that education will be a critical part of advocacy. And, it has been and will continue to be. And given all of the ways that we can do that now via technology and apps and, you know, conversations through, you know, vehicles like this, we certainly can use education to our advantage and use the technology to our advantage to reach our legislators, the people who are decision makers, and to really have an impact on them and what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, for the 27 or 23 states that had not had any encounters with you yet, how would people learn more about you and this organization if they wanted to reach out
Oh
to you?
yeah. Thank you for thank you for asking that. So our website is Tech First Shift, all one word, techfirstshift.com. And there's a way to contact us through the website. We are always happy to offer presentations to groups via Zoom, to present at conferences, to tell stories, and just to give you some connection to what we have to offer. So please reach out. We would be more than happy to chat with you.
I really appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your busy day to speak with me and for my listeners to hear about what you're doing. And did you have any final comments before we conclude?
I want to thank you, Stephen. I know when we met the first time, we just had this synergy about the way people can work hand in hand with the disabilities or the IDD community to move forward in some really unique ways. And I want to thank you in what you do in your role. Learning from you the other day was very inspiring and kind of rekindled some passion for me. So
Oh,
just,
wonderful.
yeah, just want to thank you for what you're doing for this world with this podcast and the connections you're making, because it certainly helps us spread the word, but also create more opportunity for learning and listening to each other. So,
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on my show, I mean, my show is ostensibly about accessible housing, but this
sure.
business of changing the thinking around how we can live safely and live more effectively and independently in our own homes is very part and central of what you're doing. Even
Yeah.
though you're not a housing provider per se, you're not providing you're not involved in that in a direct way. The indirect way you are is critical to what this podcast is all about. So thank you so much for coming on my show today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Stephen. You take care of yourself. Thank you.